Assassins filled the alien queen's throne room. Her human guard locked the doors. Why would her human guard lock the doors when the throne room was already filled with assassins? And what could possibly happen once no one inside could leave? Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. It's great to have you here for another journey beyond the stars. If you enjoy immersive sci-fi stories like this one, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our next adventure. Thank you for spending your time with us and for continuing to support the channel. Your support truly means a lot. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Now, let's begin the story. Your Majesty, whatever happens next, do not order me to open those doors. Ethan Cole said it quietly, and that was what made Queen Valeira turn. The crystal throne hall of the Astran Dominion had been built to make visitors feel small. Sapphire light poured through windows nearly 60 feet high, scattering across polished black stone and the silver branches of the royal throne. 200 diplomats stood beneath floating banners, while ceremonial guards formed perfect lines along the walls. Everything looked controlled. Everything sounded controlled. Then Ethan noticed the first mistake. One royal guard held his ceremonial spear in his left hand. A tiny thing, meaningless to anyone else. Ethan had spent 72 hours studying palace security protocol, and Astran guards were trained from childhood to carry ceremonial weapons on the right during royal assembly. His eyes moved. Second mistake. Another guard passed beneath a security lamp, but the reflective markings on his armor failed to shift from violet to blue. Counterfeit coating. His pulse slowed instead of quickening. That old marine instinct had never felt like courage to Ethan. It felt like the world becoming painfully clear. He glanced toward the eastern entrance. The door opened. 2 seconds early. Majesty, he said. Valeira remained facing the Earth ambassador below her throne. At nearly 7 feet tall, with sapphire skin, silver-white hair, and amber eyes, she carried the stillness of someone who had never needed to raise her voice to command a room. Not now, Mr. Cole. Ethan counted faces. 6 near the eastern door. 4 beside the diplomatic gallery. 3 near the throne steps. More along the walls. Too many. The overhead lights flickered once. Ethan moved. The lights vanished for less than 2 seconds. Someone shouted. Metal scraped against stone. Emergency illumination returned in cold blue strips, and the throne room had changed. Ceremonial spears had unfolded into compact energy weapons. Several diplomats froze. The genuine royal guards looked toward their commanders for orders, only to discover that some of those commanders were aiming back at them. Valeira rose slowly. Her expression remained composed, but Ethan saw her fingers tighten against the throne. Mr. Cole, stay behind the throne. That is not a request you are authorized to make. Today's full of surprises. Ethan crossed 10 feet to the emergency security panel. A warning symbol flashed beneath his palm. Royal containment requires sovereign authorization. He looked toward Valeira. She understood immediately. Absolutely not. Ethan removed the manual override key from his belt. The nearest disguised guard stepped forward. Ethan turned the key. Somewhere beneath the palace, ancient machinery awakened with a deep mechanical groan. 4 massive blast doors descended. The eastern exit sealed first, then west, north, south. The final door struck the floor with a thunderous metallic boom that rolled through the chamber and faded into silence. Every face turned toward the lone human. Valeira stared at him. You locked us in. Ethan calmly checked the security display. 17 unidentified weapons. 17 hostile signatures. 0 open exits. Then he looked across the throne room at the assassins surrounding his queen. No, Your Majesty, he said. I locked them in. And from the balcony above, the commander of Valeira's own royal guard slowly began to smile. 72 hours earlier, Ethan Cole had walked into the Astran Royal Palace carrying 1 black duffel bag and enough skepticism to make half the welcoming committee uncomfortable. The palace rose nearly 900 feet above the capital, its sapphire towers connected by transparent bridges that glowed beneath the afternoon sun. Ethan barely looked at them. Beautiful buildings did not interest him until he knew where the exits were. Commander Talvek, head of the Royal Guard, met him beneath the main security arch. He was taller than Ethan by almost a foot, broad-shouldered beneath silver ceremonial armor, with the expression of a man receiving an unwanted package. Earth sent one human, Talvek asked. Apparently I was cheaper than two, Ethan replied. Talvek did not smile. Neither did the guards behind him. Ethan expected that. The assignment was political theater. Earth and the Asteran Dominion were preparing their first permanent defense agreement, and placing a human security officer near Queen Velara was supposed to demonstrate trust between both civilizations. Nobody had asked whether the palace actually wanted him there. Velara made her opinion clear during their first meeting. She stood beside a floating projection of the capital while ministers moved around her with practiced silence. I have 600 royal guards, Mr. Cole, she said. I am aware, Your Majesty. Then explain what one human adds to my protection. Ethan looked toward the nearest window. A different set of mistakes. That earned him her attention. For the next 2 days, Ethan learned the palace. He walked service corridors at midnight. He timed elevator doors. He studied evacuation routes, ventilation shafts, emergency shutters, guard rotations, and the old mechanical systems hidden beneath layers of elegant Astran technology. The royal guards found his habits amusing. Humans, one lieutenant told him, behaved as though danger might emerge from the walls. Ethan answered by knocking on the wall. Sometimes it does. On the second night, he noticed camera 12 losing 0.8 of a second from its recording every 31 minutes. The security technicians blamed synchronization drift. Ethan checked the previous month. Same gap, same interval. Then he found a thermal sensor near the eastern entrance calibrated 3 degrees too warm, enough to blur the distinction between individual bodies during crowded ceremonies. The next morning, he examined personnel records. One maintenance authorization belonged to an Asteran technician named Orvek Sal. According to the civil registry, Orvek Sal had died 6 months earlier. Ethan brought everything to Commander Talvek. The commander studied the evidence for less than a minute. Coincidences. 3 coincidences make a pattern. Humans see threats everywhere. That is why humans are still here. Talvek dismissed him. Ethan should have followed protocol. Instead, he waited outside the Queen's private observatory until Velara emerged alone. Her amber eyes narrowed when she saw him. Commander Talvek tells me you are disturbing my security staff. They will survive. You have evidence of a threat? Not enough. Then why are you here? Ethan handed her the dead technician's authorization record. Velara read it once. The faint irritation disappeared from her face. Ethan watched the palace lights reflected in the glass behind her. Thousands of windows. Hundreds of guards. One system everyone trusted. Someone is testing your security, Velara said. Ethan shook his head. No, Your Majesty. His gaze settled on the royal guard insignia displayed above the corridor. Someone is not trying to get into your palace. They are already inside. The memory ended with Ethan standing outside the observatory, and the present returned with Commander Talvek, smiling from the balcony above the sealed throne room. Ethan understood 2 things at once. His warning had been right, and he had trusted the wrong man with it. 17 unidentified weapons glowed on the security display beside him. 26 rounds remained in his sidearm. Those numbers mattered. Panic did not. Ethan, Velara said behind him, her voice lower now. Talvek controls palace security. Not anymore. Ethan touched the emergency panel. No response. External command authority had overridden the throne room network. Communications were silent. Elevators were disabled. Even the diplomatic emergency channel showed nothing but gray static. Talvek raised one hand from the balcony. The disguised guards began moving. Ethan did not wait. He struck the lighting controls, and the brilliant sapphire chamber dropped into emergency illumination. Shadows stretched between the towering columns. The assassins had trained for a royal hall filled with light, open sight lines, and frightened diplomats. Ethan gave them something else. Everyone down, he called. The diplomats lowered themselves behind ceremonial benches, while Velara moved behind the crystalline throne. Ethan crossed to a service console and opened the environmental controls. Cold vapor rolled from ceiling vents, filling the upper half of the chamber with silver mist. Visibility collapsed. You are interfering with royal climate systems, Velara observed. Ethan glanced at her. File a complaint. A sharp pulse of energy flashed through the haze and struck an empty section of floor. Ethan moved toward a marble column, listening instead of looking. Boots. Cloth. A mechanical click. He redirected a ceremonial force screen across the eastern aisle. Three approaching assassins found their path suddenly blocked by a transparent wall of blue light. Ethan used the moment to trigger the floor guidance system. Bright evacuation arrows appeared beneath the diplomats, directing them toward reinforced alcoves built for earthquakes and atmospheric emergencies. Veilira watched him work. There was no dramatic charge, no reckless display. He kept changing the room until the attackers no longer understood the room they were standing in. Another figure emerged through the mist near the throne. Veilira reacted before Ethan could. She swept her royal staff across the control strip beside her seat. A containment field snapped into place around the intruder, locking him inside a cylinder of pale light. Ethan looked at her. Useful throne. It has survived 9 dynasties. I'm starting to see why. For the first time, something almost like amusement touched her face. Then the security display changed. One hostile signature disappeared from Ethan's immediate sector. 16 remained active. More importantly, every friendly signal outside the throne room vanished at once. Ethan stared at the screen. That is impossible, Veilira whispered. 600 royal guards should have been converging on the hall. No one was coming. Ethan opened the internal communications channel manually. Palace security, this is Cole. Confirm status. Static answered him. Then Commander Talvek's voice came through, calm and almost gentle. There will be no rescue, human. Veilira went perfectly still. Ethan looked upward, but Talvek had disappeared from the balcony. The Queen stepped beside him, her amber eyes fixed on the dead communications display. How much of my guard belongs to him? Ethan checked every channel again. Nothing. He wished he had a better answer. Enough. A soft mechanical tone sounded behind them. One of the sealed blast doors had begun receiving an external override request. Ethan watched the authorization code scroll across the panel. It carried the highest security clearance in the Dominion, one level below the Queen herself. This was not 17 assassins breaking into a palace. This was a palace turning against its queen. Veilira lifted her staff and stood beside the human she had not wanted 3 days earlier. Then we hold this room. Ethan checked his remaining ammunition. Now you are speaking my language. The override counter reached 10%, then 20%. Ethan looked toward the massive door as ancient locking mechanisms began to groan. Someone outside was trying to open it, and whoever controlled the palace had all the time in the world. The override counter reached 31% when Ethan heard Veilira inhale sharply behind him. It was not fear. The sound was too controlled for that. He turned and saw her left hand gripping the edge of the crystalline throne, her amber eyes fixed on something near her wrist. A narrow tear crossed the sleeve of her royal uniform where the assassin near the throne had reached her moments earlier. The mark itself looked insignificant, barely more than a dark line against sapphire skin, but a faint silver discoloration was spreading outward beneath it. Ethan crossed the distance immediately. Let me see. Veilira pulled her arm back. The door can wait 10 seconds. At its current override rate, it cannot. Ethan looked at the counter. 34%. Then back at her arm. Neither can you. He opened the medical pouch attached to his belt. Veilira watched him remove a compact scanner no larger than his palm. Human medical equipment will not understand astrobiology. It does not need to understand everything. It needs to tell me whether something is moving through your bloodstream. The scanner passed over her wrist and gave a soft warning tone. Ethan's expression changed. Elevated neural activity. Rapid chemical migration. Unknown compound. Poison, she asked. Probably a neuromuscular agent. How long? I do not know. That answer seemed to surprise her more than reassurance would have. Astron courtiers apparently preferred certainty, even false certainty. Ethan preferred useful truth. He removed a pressure band from the kit and secured it several inches above the injury, slowing circulation without stopping it completely. Your hand may start feeling heavy. It already does. The override reached 40%. Ethan found a sealed injector labeled broad-spectrum metabolic stabilizer. It had been developed for human expedition teams dealing with unknown planetary toxins. Not ideal. Better than nothing. This may slow whatever they used, but I cannot promise how your system will react. Veilira studied his face. Would you use it on yourself? Yes. Then proceed. He administered the stabilizer and watched the scanner. 3 seconds. 5. The chemical migration slowed. Ethan released a breath he had not realized he was holding. Veilira noticed. You were uncertain. Still am. Yet your hands did not shake. Ethan began repacking the kit. They are shaking now. She looked down. He was right. Barely. Just enough for the metal clasp to tap softly against the medical case. For the first time since the attack began, the Queen seemed to forget the assassins, the sealed doors, and the betrayal surrounding them. You are afraid, she said. Ethan looked toward the override counter. 52%. A failing. Veilira's expression softened, but a movement in the silver vapor interrupted the moment. Ethan stepped between her and the open chamber without thinking. A shadow approached through the haze. He raised his sidearm. Stop. The figure froze. It was an Asteran diplomat, terrified and unarmed, separated from the others when the emergency lights failed. Ethan lowered the weapon and directed him toward the reinforced alcoves. Veilira watched the exchange silently. You checked him before yourself, she said. What? The diplomat. Then me. You have not checked yourself once. Ethan glanced down. A warning light blinked on his uniform where a defensive energy pulse had overloaded part of his protective vest. Later. That is an order. Respectfully, Your Majesty, your orders are having a difficult afternoon. Despite everything, she almost smiled. Then the throne room speakers activated with a low chime. Commander Talvek's voice filled the chamber. Queen Veilira, surrender the human and unlock the throne room. No one else needs to suffer. Ethan looked at Veilira. She looked back at him. The override counter passed 60%. He wants you, she whispered. No. Ethan said, watching the numbers climb. He wants you to believe giving me up will save everyone. Then the counter stopped. 63%. Ethan stared at it. Veilira did the same. Somewhere deep inside the ancient palace, a second security system had awakened. A new message appeared across the console. Royal Siege Protocol available. Sovereign biometric authorization required. Ethan slowly turned toward the Queen. Veilira placed her weakening hand on the scanner. The throne room answered with a sound like distant thunder. The sound beneath the throne deepened until Ethan felt it through the soles of his boots. Thin lines of white light spread across the black marble floor, tracing patterns that had been invisible moments earlier. The override counter vanished. In its place appeared 3 words. Siege protocol active. Somewhere inside the walls, mechanical locks engaged one after another. Talvek had controlled the modern palace network. The throne room had just answered to something older. How old is this system? Ethan asked. Veilira withdrew her hand from the scanner. Her fingers moved slowly now. Older than my dynasty. Good. Why is that good? Because Talvek probably does not know how it works either. The Queen lowered herself behind the damaged throne. Ethan sat beside her, keeping his eyes on the mist-filled chamber. For the first time since the attack began, nothing moved toward them. No footsteps. No commands. Only the soft hiss of ventilation and the distant hum of emergency power. Ethan checked his sidearm. 23 rounds. He checked Veilira's scanner. The unknown compound was still spreading, but more slowly. How long can the stabilizer hold? She asked. I would be lying if I gave you a number. Humans admit uncertainty with remarkable ease. We have had practice. Her amber eyes rested on him. In the cold emergency light, she looked less like the ruler carved into monuments across the capital and more like someone carrying the weight of several billion lives without permission to show how heavy it was. Your contract does not require you to die for me, she said. Ethan inspected the sidearm's power-assisted sight, then disabled it. If Talvek controlled modern security, he might be tracking active electronics. Good. Veilira frowned. Good. Means I am not doing this because somebody wrote it into a contract. Then why are you still here? Ethan stopped. Across the chamber, frightened diplomats whispered inside the reinforced alcoves. Somewhere beyond 4 sealed doors waited a palace full of people who had either betrayed their queen or were too isolated to reach her. Ethan could have answered with duty. Training. Earth. The Alliance. All of those answers were true. None were the truth she was asking for. He looked at her weakening hand. Because leaving would be wrong. Veilira said nothing. Ethan returned his attention to the room. The silence stretched between them without becoming uncomfortable. That is your explanation? She finally asked. Pretty much. My people have legal codes containing 12,000 pages defining royal duty. Sounds exhausting. You crossed 40 light years to protect a foreign sovereign, ignored my commander, locked yourself inside a room with 17 assassins, and your moral reasoning is that leaving would be wrong. Ethan considered it. When you say it like that, it sounds underdeveloped. A quiet sound escaped her. Not quite laughter, but close. Then Ethan noticed movement near the eastern column. He raised his weapon, but the figure stumbled into the white floor light and stopped. One of the assassins. His weapon was gone. His breathing came fast, and one arm hung uselessly at his side after striking a containment barrier. He looked young, younger than Ethan expected. Veilira immediately straightened. Do not approach him. The assassin sank against the column. Please. Ethan watched him for 2 seconds, then holstered his weapon. Ethan. He is injured. He came here to kill me. I know. Ethan picked up his medical kit. Veilira stared at him as though the human had finally done something she could not understand. You would help him? Ethan crossed the marble floor carefully. If he can be helped. Why? Ethan knelt several feet from the young Astron and placed the medical kit between them. Same reason. The assassin looked from Ethan to the Queen, confusion replacing fear. Ethan slid the kit closer. I am going to help you. In return, you are going to tell me who gave the order. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Then the young assassin whispered a name that made Veilira's face lose all expression. Lord Chancellor Kaler. Ethan turned toward her. Veilira stood perfectly still. That is impossible, she said. The assassin swallowed. He said your death would be blamed on Earth. Ethan felt the room become colder. Veilira whispered, almost to herself. Kaler raised me after my father died. The assassin looked toward Ethan. By sunrise, your worlds will believe they are at war. For several seconds, Veilira seemed unable to hear anything except the name. Lord Chancellor Kaler, the man whose signature appeared beneath every treaty of her reign. The man who had taught her how to address the Imperial Council when she was 14. The man who had stood beside her at her father's memorial and promised she would never face the throne alone. Ethan watched the realization settle behind her amber eyes. He had seen betrayal before. It rarely arrived like anger. Usually, it arrived quietly. Tell me everything, Ethan said. The young assassin glanced toward Veilira, then back to the human who had just offered him medical aid. Kaler controls the Communications Ministry, 3 Palace Security Divisions, and Commander Talvek. The attack was designed to look human. Ethan's jaw tightened. Explain. Your weapon signatures. Your security clearance. Your presence beside the Queen. When she dies, fabricated recordings will show you responsible. Earth will deny involvement. The Dominion will call that denial another insult. Veilira slowly lowered herself onto the throne step. And Kaler becomes regent during wartime. The assassin nodded. Until the Succession Council chooses a new sovereign. Ethan looked around the sealed chamber differently now. This was no longer a room under attack. It was a stage. Every camera, every frightened diplomat, every disabled communication channel had been arranged to tell a story after Veilira was gone. How long before the false evidence is released? Ethan asked. By sunrise. That gives us hours. Less, Veilira said. Her voice had recovered its authority, but not its warmth. Once Kaler confirms I cannot contact the fleet, he will issue an emergency declaration. Ethan checked her medical scanner. The stabilizer was still slowing the toxin, but her pulse had become uneven. Then we need proof before he gets his version out. Veilira looked toward the ancient white lines glowing across the floor. The siege protocol. Ethan followed her gaze. What does it record? Everything. She explained that centuries earlier, Astron rulers had feared coups more than foreign invasion. During a royal siege, the throne room created an independent archive beyond the modern palace network. Voice patterns, biometric identities, command authorizations, environmental data. Every action was preserved inside a hardened recorder beneath the throne. Ethan almost smiled. Your ancestors were paranoid. They preferred the term prepared. I like your ancestors. A low chime sounded from the sealed doors. Then a different voice entered the chamber speakers. Older, calm, familiar to Veilira in a way that made her shoulders stiffen. My child, Lord Chancellor Kaler said. Veilira closed her eyes for half a second. Ethan remained beside her. You have been frightened by a dangerous human, Kaler continued. Give Ethan Cole to Commander Talvek. Open the doors. I will restore order. Ethan watched the siege protocol indicator. Recording active. Veilira saw it too. You expect me to trust you? She asked. A pause followed. I expect you to remember who protected you when your father could not. Something changed in Veilira's expression. Not weakness. Something colder. And if I refuse? Then Earth will mourn the consequences of its interference. Ethan looked at her. There it was. Not a confession, but close enough to expose intent if Kaylor kept talking. Ethan stepped toward the communications panel, but Veilira raised her weakening hand. She understood the plan without explanation. Keep him speaking. You would start a war, she said. Kaylor's answer came softly. Wars are temporary. Stability lasts generations. Ethan felt every remaining doubt disappear. Veilira looked at the glowing recorder beneath the throne, then at the frightened diplomats sheltered across the chamber. Kaylor believed he was speaking privately to a trapped queen. He had no idea an ancient system was preserving every word. Ethan leaned closer to Veilira. We do not need to defeat his army. Her amber eyes met his. We need him to tell the truth. Before she could answer, a heavy mechanical impact sounded beyond the northern blast door. Then another. Kaylor had stopped negotiating. Ethan checked the door status. External pressure was rising rapidly. He looked at the queen, then at the 16 remaining hostile signatures inside the hall. We have proof, Veilira whispered. Ethan shook his head. Not enough. The northern door trembled again. Then what do you suggest? Ethan watched the pressure readings climb and understood what Kaylor expected them to do. Hide. Wait. Break. Instead, Ethan reached for the manual door controls. We invite him inside. We invite him inside, Veilira repeated, staring at Ethan as another deep vibration rolled through the northern door. That is your plan. Ethan studied the ancient control panel. Part of it. Humans have an unsettling definition of reassurance. You noticed. The northern door shuddered again. Ethan ignored it and examined the siege protocol map glowing beneath the throne. The old system controlled more than locks. Gravity regulators, atmospheric vents, ceremonial magnetic flooring, containment fields. Systems designed centuries ago to turn the throne room into a fortress if an enemy ever reached the sovereign. Kaylor had modern security. Ethan had history. How many people can he bring through that entrance? Ethan asked. The northern corridor is 12 feet wide. Good. Narrow approach. Veilira's eyes narrowed. You intend to open it voluntarily. For a few seconds. Absolutely not. Ethan looked at her. If Kaylor stays outside, he controls the story. If he comes inside, the siege protocol records him. And if 20 armed soldiers come with him, then we make sure they cannot operate as 20 soldiers. Veilira glanced toward the diplomats sheltered inside the reinforced alcoves. Ethan understood the question she did not ask. The civilians stay protected. No unnecessary confrontation. The young assassin Ethan had helped lifted his head from beside the column. Kaylor will not enter first. Talvek will. Ethan nodded. Even better. He moved across the chamber, adjusting environmental controls one by one. The temperature dropped several degrees. The silver mist thickened near the northern entrance. He reduced local gravity in a 20-foot section beyond the door, then increased it slightly around the throne platform. Not enough to harm anyone. Enough to make unfamiliar movement awkward. Next came the magnetic floor. Ceremonial Astran weapons contained enough metal to trigger the system. Ethan programmed it to activate only after the door resealed. Veilira watched him. You studied all of this in 3 days? I was bored. You inspected my palace until 4 in the morning. Very bored. A faint smile appeared, then vanished when her injured hand trembled. Ethan noticed immediately. Sit down. I am the queen. You can be the queen sitting down. She gave him a look that might have ended another man's career. Then she sat. Ethan checked her scanner. The toxin was still controlled, but the margin was shrinking. They needed medical support soon. A communication tone sounded. Talvek's voice followed. Human, surrender now and you will be treated according to diplomatic law. Ethan walked to the console. Commander, you tried that speech already. You cannot win. Ethan looked at the ancient systems surrounding him. I am not trying to win. He entered the first command. Northern door manual release ready. Veilira arose despite his instruction. Ethan. He turned. For the first time, she did not sound like his sovereign. She sounded like someone asking another person not to disappear behind a closing door. If this fails. Ethan considered lying. He did not. Then we make the next decision. Her amber eyes held his. Together. Ethan nodded once. Together, he positioned Veolyra behind the reinforced throne barrier and signaled the diplomats to remain sheltered. Then he entered the second command. The northern blast door unlocked with a mechanical boom. Cold mist curled across the floor as the massive barrier began rising. Boots appeared first. Silver armor. Royal insignia. Commander Talvek stepped beneath the opening with a formation of palace soldiers behind him. His confidence returned the instant he saw Ethan standing alone in the center of the chamber. Finally, Talvek said. Ethan waited until the last soldier crossed the threshold. Then his thumb touched the control. The blast door dropped behind them. Magnetic locks engaged. Gravity shifted. Ceremonial weapons became fixed to the floor as containment fields illuminated around the formation. Surprise replaced confidence across Talvek's face. Ethan remained still. You said I could not win, he said. You misunderstood. Above them, the siege protocol began recording every biometric signature entering the room. Ethan looked past Talvek toward the sealed door. Kaler was still outside. That was the problem. Ethan had captured the commander. Now he needed the man who had given the order. Talvek tested the containment field once, then stopped when blue light brightened around his armor. His soldiers stood scattered across the northern section of the throne room, their ceremonial weapons held harmlessly against the magnetic floor. Ethan counted them twice. Nobody appeared injured. Nobody needed to be. The room itself had done the work. Release us, Talvek said. Not yet. Ethan crossed to the siege protocol console. The display showed every person inside the chamber, every command issued, every security authorization used since Veolyra activated the system. It was evidence, but evidence trapped beneath a palace controlled by Kaler was only a secret waiting to disappear. Veolyra approached slowly. The toxin had weakened her movements, yet her voice remained steady. Kaler will know Talvek failed. That is what we need. Ethan opened the communication channel. Chancellor, your commander is secure. Your people are secure. Nobody needs to be harmed. Silence. Ethan waited. You believe restraint makes you strong, human? Kaler finally answered. No. I think it gives people fewer reasons to hate each other tomorrow. Veolyra looked at Ethan, but he kept his attention on the console. Release Talvek, Kaler ordered. Come inside and ask him yourself. Another silence. Longer this time. Ethan could almost feel the Chancellor calculating. Then Kaler laughed softly. You are trying to lure me into the siege protocol archive. Veolyra's expression tightened. Kaler knew. Ethan changed plans immediately. Then stay outside. He turned off the channel. What are you doing? Veolyra asked, making him wonder why I stopped caring. Ethan moved to the ancient archive controls. A transmission function existed, but the palace network blocked every external route. Every route except one. Ethan noticed a narrow frequency listed beneath emergency sovereign functions. What is Royal Beacon 7? Veolyra leaned closer. An obsolete coronation signal. It broadcasts directly to ceremonial receivers across the capital. Can Kaler shut it down? Not without disabling the city's oldest civic network. Ethan smiled faintly. Your ancestors really were paranoid. He routed the siege protocol archive toward the beacon. Warning symbols filled the display. Bandwidth insufficient. Transmission required manual stabilization from the throne relay, 20 feet beyond the protected barrier. Ethan stepped toward it. Veolyra caught his sleeve with her good hand. The containment fields may collapse when you redirect power. I know. Then I will do it. You can barely feel your left arm. And you are not my sovereign. Exactly. Ethan gently freed his sleeve and crossed the glowing floor. Behind him, containment lights flickered as power shifted toward the ancient transmitter. Talvek noticed. So did his soldiers. Ethan reached the relay and placed both hands on the controls. Ethan, Veolyra warned. Almost there. The magnetic field weakened. One ceremonial weapon lifted an inch from the floor before dropping again. Ethan pushed more power into the beacon. The relay vibrated beneath his hands. The throne room lights dimmed. Then the archive began transmitting. Kaler's voice filled thousands of ceremonial receivers across the capital. Wars are temporary. Stability lasts generations. The sentence repeated, followed by his authorization codes, Talvek's biometric record, and the assassin's testimony. Talvek stared upward, as if the ceiling itself had betrayed him. Veolyra whispered, the entire capital can hear this. Ethan looked at the transmission meter. 40%. 52. 68. Then the containment system failed. Blue barriers vanished. Talvek stepped free. Ethan moved immediately between the commander and Veolyra. He did not raise his weapon. "It is over, Talvek." The commander looked toward the queen, then toward his own soldiers. None of them moved. The broadcast continued. 84%. 91. Talvek's shoulders slowly lowered. "You should have killed us when you had the advantage," he said. Ethan shook his head. Then Kaler would have gotten the war he wanted. The transmission reached 100%. Across the chamber, every ancient light turned white. Archive distributed. Immutable record confirmed. Veolyra stared at Ethan as understanding finally reached her. He had never been trying to destroy her enemies. He had been trying to leave them alive long enough for the truth to survive them. Then the southern blast door chimed. A sovereign access request appeared on the console. Veolyra looked at the identity code and went still. Lord Chancellor Kaler was standing on the other side, requesting entry himself. The southern door remained closed while Kaler's identity code glowed on the console. Nobody moved. Not Talvek. Not his soldiers. Not the diplomats emerging cautiously from the reinforced alcoves. Across the capital, the truth was already beyond anyone's control. Ethan looked at Veolyra. "Your decision." For the first time that day, he did not move before she did. Veolyra approached the console with measured steps. Her left hand still trembled from the toxin, but she placed her right palm against the sovereign scanner. "Open the southern door." Ancient machinery answered. The massive barrier rose slowly, revealing Lord Chancellor Kaler standing alone in the corridor. His formal silver robes were immaculate. His expression was not. Behind him, palace officers filled the passage, but their weapons were lowered. The broadcast had reached them too. Kaler entered the throne room and stopped when he saw Talvek surrounded not by enemies, but by his own silent soldiers. Then he looked at Veolyra. "My child, do not call me that." Her voice was quiet enough to make the enormous chamber seem smaller. Kaler glanced toward Ethan. "This human has poisoned your judgment." Ethan said nothing. Veolyra did not look away from the Chancellor. "You poisoned more than my judgment." Kaler's confidence flickered. "I preserved this dominion when your father died. You taught me that power exists to protect those who cannot stand inside rooms like this." Veolyra looked toward the diplomats, the guards, and finally the young assassin Ethan had chosen to help. "Today, a foreigner remembered that lesson better than you did." Kaler turned toward the open door, but palace officers stepped aside rather than follow him. There was nowhere left for his authority to go. Veolyra did not order punishment. She simply invoked the Imperial Council and placed Kaler and Talvek into lawful custody, pending public tribunal. Ethan watched officers escort them away without celebration. No cheering followed. Only the low mechanical hum of the throne room returning to normal. 3 weeks later, sunlight filled the restored hall. The damaged systems had been repaired. The black marble had been polished. The ceremonial banners hung again beneath the 60-foot windows. Veolyra had recovered fully, and the Earth Treaty had been signed without a single clause changed. Ethan stood before the throne in a dark formal uniform while hundreds of representatives watched from both sides of the chamber. An attendant carried the Star of Asterin, the Dominion's highest civilian honor. "Ethan Cole," Veolyra said, "step forward." He did. A court official whispered, "Kneel." Ethan glanced at Veolyra. She remembered their first meeting. A human sent as political decoration. A queen protected by 600 guards. Neither of them had been entirely correct about the other. Ethan started to lower himself. "No," Veolyra said. Murmurs traveled through the hall. The queen descended the throne steps instead. One step, then another, until she stood at the same level as Ethan. She took the medal from the attendant and placed it into Ethan's hand rather than fastening it to his uniform. "Asterin tradition says honor is given from above," she said. "Perhaps some traditions deserve revision." Ethan looked at the medal. "That sounds dangerously human. I have had a poor influence." The smallest smile passed between them. Then Ethan noticed something beyond her shoulder. All 4 throne room doors were open. Not partially. Fully. Sunlight reached through the eastern corridor, while cool air moved freely through the hall. "You changed the security protocol," he said. Veolyra followed his gaze. "Only for today." She paused. "I used to believe closed doors meant fear." Ethan looked across the chamber where Asterins and humans now stood together beneath the same light. Sometimes they do. And that day, she asked. Ethan thought about 17 hostile signatures, 26 rounds, an ancient system nobody remembered, and one decision that had somehow become larger than either of them. That day, they gave the truth enough time to survive. Veilira said nothing. She did not need to. Beyond the open doors, the city shimmered beneath a sapphire sky, and for once the palace felt less like a fortress than a promise. The galaxy had spent centuries building doors to keep danger out. A human had reminded them that sometimes courage was simply choosing who you refused to leave behind.